All right, hello everybody. Welcome to the monthly show. I've been doing this forever, and definitely an interesting time where we started with Over the Board, and it seemed for half a second that we were going to stay over the board last month, or that we were going to become more and more over the board, and now feels like it's going to be a while. Anyways, many beautiful games today, and let me just introduce the show and my intentions as I do every time here. I started this years ago. My goal was to provide encouragement and support for those of you out there who are trying to get better, and I believe that studying your games is the best way to do that, but also the hardest. And so I'm hoping to just share with you some of my thoughts about the games presented. And, what I want to stress is I never use the computer, so I'm going to make a lot of mistakes myself. And I'm just trying to show you how I see the game through my eyes and, talk about it a little bit. I also highlight up there the players' notes themselves. Several games are always submitted without notes, and I never covered those games because the idea was to say that it's not just me going over your games that's important, it's you doing the work, and that is in fact the most interesting thing you can do. I'm just like a secondary voice on top of that. If you go back through the years now, you can see notes from several players that we're going to even be covering today, and you can see how they've grown in their ability to talk about their own game and to talk and think about chess, I think. So, Vish Chess is asked, is there a game list? Yes, there is. Let's take a look right at that. And we've got a lot of inter-dojo fights coming up. And so, Vishnu, you'll be somewhere around there in the middle. And one of the things that I do every month is I forget to change the scene, and so I end up talking about some game. So if I do that, start screaming at me with like loud purple letters over there, to when I blow it. As I don't think I've ever gone through a show without forgetting to switch. Okay, so if you are watching this and would like to participate, maybe you're watching it on YouTube, and I will have a link down below for how you can do this. But basically, shortly after I finish this show, we'll post a link on the chess.com forums where you can submit your own game. And the only requirement is that you spend some time writing about the game yourself, preferably with words. Giving me a sense, me and everyone a sense, and yourself a sense of how you saw the game. Okay, so let's get into it. We've got AFM Hughes playing in a Simul against Hikaru, and it's pretty interesting. It's an interesting game from a variety of standpoints. Just last night, I was just having the most terrible time with the streaming. Like nothing was working for me. Absolutely nothing, and I was being miserable. Anyways, just last night in the US Chess School, I covered a game where I played against Hikaru in 2010, and I think Kostya is going to post that soon-ish. So that will be out there to look at, kind of in coordination, or at least the inspiration was because we had been looking at Gelfand's technical chess book, and we're actually going to get an ending in this game which I feel is reminiscent of the technical chess book as well. Okay, so let's dive into it. And of course, Hughes is black here, and I have played this position many times as white, and in general the two main theoretical moves are DC and E6. And bishop f5, at least when I was a kid, was thought to be incorrect. Now, maybe, but not because of what Hikaru does, I don't think. The reason it was thought to be incorrect was the following line. Takes, queen b3, and if queen b6, then knight d5. I want to stress, however, that these positions are scary for white. And where it's funny about this game is this is, of course, happening in a simul. And let me just put out the tactical point here. If queen b3, you throw in the intermezzo. So this is having a simul, and I feel like I've had this position very often in simuls where people not knowing that it's a bad move to play bishop f5, but it might not actually be that bad of a move. So let me just share, in this position with queen b3, if you want to be passive and play bishop c8, you can get like a bad exchange Slav, but it's very solid. But more interesting is to think about either like knight c6, queen b7, and then bishop d7 with some counterplay, or queen b6, knight d5 in this kind of position, where black certainly has some counterplay. And I will say, I think this applies to what happens in this game too, is that when you're white and you're playing in a simul, you really, any position, usually you're white in a simul, but what I was trying to say is that you don't want to steal pawns, at least in my experience, because then accidents can happen. Whereas if you just play, let's call it normal chess, you can often outplay your opponent without using too much energy. And that's kind of the story of what happens here. So Hikaru plays queen b3. And my sense of this is maybe white gets an advantage here too, but after the question is, of course, what happens after queen b6, because now we get this trade. Okay, very interesting position, and I am not sure about knight takes d5. My guess would be that we would want to play cd. However, on cd, you've got to wonder about knight b5, which truly might be problematic. Maybe Hikaru's move is just better, and it's here that Hikaru's blows it with e3. Because from a positional standpoint, to me, e4 looks very strong, with the point that knight c3, ef, I think is a joyous position for white, despite the doubled pawns everywhere. This guy's going to get traded off anyway, because e6 or g6 will come. And my gut feeling is that white is better in this position. Okay, so maybe I have to store that away, is that back in the day, it was thought that you played cd first after bishop f5, but now we're saying maybe queen b, if queen b6 is poor anyway, then this would be the way to play. Now, another interesting thought for black would be to sack the pawn still, like this, and try to get that compensation. Anyways, let's look at the game. And Hikaru is going to make several moves in this game where he's just going to be, let's say, stabilizing the position, right? And by that, I just mean not trying to do anything too fancy. Just trying to, make a move, go on to the next board, and hopefully things will become easy on their own. And honestly, it ends up making the simul much harder, because then the simul lasts longer and longer. Okay, so let's look. Hughes misses a chance with knight b4, and it's at least very annoying for white. Okay, so now e6 and bishop d2. I still kind of want to play e4, honestly, for white. But in any case, here we go. Knight b4. And this is definitely some kind of achievement, because rook c1 is not really something I want to do. The rook was developed more so on a1 than c1. And here we're going to get an interesting situation that Hughes doesn't comment on. He plays knight d3 and writes securing the bishop pair. But then I think white's going to be doing pretty good. Notice that when we play bishop takes, we are going to be developing a piece. So the other move to consider is knight d7. Now, part of the interesting question, I think, is, and this comes up in our Gelfand book club discussion, is what is black playing for? I.e., does black think he or she is better? And this feels, just like an interesting position. Knight d3 is definitely a move where you're going for it and probably won't work out because you don't have any pieces developed. So knight d7 is the other option here. And intuitively, I would say that black is a little worse here. But the next move, which Hughes doesn't comment on, I think makes the difficulties worse. Now let's just say the obvious thing. Black is saying that he's poorly developed, but his beautiful unopposed bishop is giving him positional compensation. Okay, so my guess is that we should be playing a move like knight d7. And there's a variety of things white can do, but definitely feels right. Instead, we get f6, and now Hughes, right, he makes a huge mistake in allowing knight d6. However, now it's already a little bit unpleasant, I think. For example, if you want to stop knight d6 and play something like king d7, well, then you're in the way of the knight. And like in the game, if you ever take on c4, well, obviously white has achieved something. Okay. Now, Hikaru makes the second move, which is very typical of Simuls, where you don't want to calculate anything, you just want to make a building move and then go to the next board, and that's f3. And Hughes correctly writes, I think, that this would have been very unpleasant after bishop b4. Okay, even the speed genius makes some mistakes. All right, snip, snip. And now we got to say we like white. e5, king f2, king f7, bishop c3, and now a move I don't like, h6. Well, Vishnu knows why I don't like it. I don't like it because I'm a tempo fiend, right? And then that, I assume, you want to control the g5 square, in which case bishop e7 makes a lot of sense. So, yes, Seth, we're going to direct you on how to get to the thread. And, yeah, Vishnu is doing so. One of the primary crimes here that I see on the show, and that I rage against, I rage against the loss of tempo, is some moves like h6. We've seen a lot of moves like h6, and I think after bishop e7, white might be a little better, but you're doing okay. You're doing all right. So, snip, snip, rook hd1, bishop e7. All right, and here, it's honestly a little bit surprising that black survives. I'm going to guess that when Hikaru took and planted the rook, that he said to himself, yeah, this isn't going to last that much longer. But the truth is that after rook b8, the king is coming to e6, and, well, white needs to find something special, or else things are just going to get traded away. And the big asset for us here is that the knight on e4 is dominated by the bishop on e7. So let's just say that I didn't find anything that spectacular for Hikaru here, but I would be looking for something better than c5. This is how it goes. Let's just say something obvious. Black has every hope now to have a better position because the bishop is a long-range piece, and we are going to have pawns moving on both sides of the board. And as my sensei Slav said, in positions with passed pawns running on both sides of the board, the bishop will be better than the knight. So let's begin thinking about the position here. And I think the key thing that black should be thinking about here is arranging the b6 break. Yeah, I think that is the most central thing for black to be doing here. So first the natural move, rook d8. Notice that it's not entirely necessary. But okay, rook d8. Snip. Snip. Now here's a funny thing. You could really consider taking with the bishop. It's anti-intuitive, but the point is that the rook kind of maybe wants to be on b8 so that it can think about b6. And here's where the point about the b6 break really becomes important, because what happens to black now is he starts to drift. And let's just show this first drift move. I'm not sure what g6 does. I'm going to admit it's not super easy to suggest a great move for black, but it needs to be time for active play, and it's also time for us to play for b6. So the simple move to think about is something like rook b8, intending b6. And do I know exactly what the evaluation is? No, but it's white who has to worry about the trend of the bishop becoming active. Yeah. We see this kind of thing in the King's Indian a lot too, where the d file isn't such a special thing, even though we're taught as chess players to be very happy to have this free and open d file. And let's say the obvious goals for white is that something like g6, even though it doesn't harm too much besides giving away time, white doesn't really have a plan. And he would love for you to make some fiddly pawn moves there on the king's side, because they give at least some hope for us being able to do something on our stronger side, on white's stronger side. And that's in fact what ultimately is going to happen here. b4, and now a move I really dislike, a6. And I think that was driven by a psychological fear that white is going to play himself b5. But no, I don't think so. That's our side of the board over there. And the second we play a6, now it just becomes harder for us to play b6. So the last two moves, mistakes come in pairs, right? g6 and a6 are drifting us into a worse and worse position. And, I've talked a little bit of smack about the Gelfand book, but I realized when I went over my own game against Hikaru, like I said, I think Kosti will put that up soon, that so many of the, at least, themes that he was talking about, in a lot of ways I wish they were better discussed, but so many of the themes were present there in my game, and definitely here too. We're getting a drift, and neither g6 or a6 are losing the game, but they are, slowly making the white position better and better. All right, Hikaru reroutes the knight, and now we have to say he's a little bit better. What did I say? We're going to play on the strong side. And here, black does something interesting. He plays e4. And whether we decide this is good or bad, I think the instructive part about this e4 move is that black drifted until he didn't have any moves left and then does the violence, right? And at that point, there's no, white has improved his position, so any violence like e4 is going to have less effect when it does happen. Okay, so snip, rook b1, h5, and I think in black's mind here, he is fixing the pawn on h4, and it's kind of true, but at the same time, white is fixing the pawn on g6. Okay, so here's obviously a point at which white needs to come up with a plan. To me, I feel like this is close to winning right now, even though Hikaru is going to kind of like fudge a budget here. I think, just intuitively, that rook b3 to d3 is really hard to meet because we control all the entrance squares and black has to worry about stuff like knight a5. And indeed, I don't think the pawn on e4 is that big of a thing, but eventually we might play e5 and king e4. You have to, one of the many things you're going to have to worry about in this position. And of course, the queenside majority is going nowhere. Okay, but Hikaru just kind of, is very mildly instructive. He's just going to go around and around. Now I don't know what's happening. Now I don't know. Yeah, I mean, now there's no reason to think that white's better. Yeah. Okay, so that's right what you said. And here's the simple plan coming to light with rook d7. White has lost the thread, as happens in Simuls, and now black has real chances to stir up some drama. Now, one of the problems I think black has is actually identifying, what he's playing for. Is he playing for a draw or is he playing for a win? And it's not super easy for me to figure out, but I do not think that black is worse here. Now, the other option besides rook d7, of course, was just to hack on f4 and then play rook d4. And it would be a violent position, let's put it that way, with everybody's going to be losing some pawns. But I believe in black's position there in any case. When this happens, and Hikaru plays knight g7, there's at least like hope for white to do his magic, right? And let's look how it goes. Rook e7. Notice it's a little bit hard to know, right, what to do in this position. King f3 is coming, and so rook e7, I'm not sure it helps. King f3 was, of course, natural instead of rook d8. Weird moves from Hikaru again, right? Okay. So here's the big moment, and for better or for worse, Hikaru goes for it. And maybe in a way he's now forced to, because he's gotten himself in a sitch where if king e2, there's rook d2. And, right, black is going to be looking to penetrate himself with rook d2 now. So the wild ride commences. a5, rook h6, and no one knows exactly what's happening in this position. But, both sides have their claims. White is having the intuition that his knight and pawns will create mating threats against the black king. And black, of course, is dreaming that the pawn is running. I believe in black. I believe in black. And Hughes gives a long variation with bishop c5. I imagine a4 is, also very touch and go for white with a4. But let's say bishop c5 in this variation that he gives. I don't think white would play rook h7, and rather I think something like g6 would come. I think that's the real question. So there's no king g7, and I'm going to play knight h5 next move, or rook h5 depending if I got something special. But knight h5 next move, and at least on the surface of things, it's not immediately evident what's happening, which is one of the reasons maybe a4 instead of bishop c5. But a very complicated position, and unfortunately, black throws it away with this move just because it gets a whole tempo. Tempo are important. And yeah. So, bummer, but very interesting game. I had a very unfortunate ending against Hikaru as well. And honestly, it took me years to even properly look at it. Maybe I didn't even look at it good enough yesterday. I was very angry yesterday at all the streaming stuff that happened to me. Anyways, these are the games that I think when you look at them really deeply, they're the ones that can really help the most, because there's so much going on in these endings, and especially if you train yourself never to make moves like g6 and a6 where you're just kind of sitting. G6 and a6 where you're sitting and giving white a chance to do whatever business he might come up with, right? Those are the moves you got to train yourself to be like, oh, I don't know about those. All right, so here we go, and let's go to Dora's game here. And this, I think, is a real game being played in Israel. Dora's been part of the ChessDojo from the beginning, and this is usually called the Schmidt-Benoni. And my experience playing, I've probably just faced it mostly in Blitz, but it's surprisingly resilient in my experience of it. Even though if you ask the computer always just says it's totally lost. And that is because of the space. And we're going to see this in this game as well, playing with the space advantage is just a difficult business. Actually, we're going to get Vishnu playing a little later with a mildly similar space advantage to this one. All right, so g4, and Dora gives it a question mark exclam, and it feels good to me. g4 can't be wrong. There's all kinds of ways to do this. Knight f3, bishop e2, knight e1. You can play g3 with the intention of playing f4. Loads of things to do, and g4 feels very modern to me. The thing that we're going to have to be wary of after g4 is that our dark squares might get taken apart, in particular this one. But it certainly makes a lot of sense to grab the space. But now, Dora, the question is, what do we do at this point? And it's not super easy for me to say. Maybe I'll say that my intuition is to play it a little bit a la Vishnu and play h3, knight e2, knight g3. And it's important to note there that what we're mostly doing is playing with space. But it's frightening too, because eventually he's going to get a knight onto f4 or something, and we're going to have to deal with it. So yeah, it's an interesting position. I'm going to guess if you turn the computer on, the computer will love it, but that's, we've talked about that on the show before. It's very hard to follow the computer guidelines when we're playing with space, because it's a different world out there when space happens. Okay, but I want to stress that the next couple moves you make here, Dora, are ugly. Okay, so bishop e2, bishop f3, and right. One of the hard things about playing for space is, as chess players, we are naturally inclined to play for some kind of violent break, right? And here what white is doing is he's playing for the violence of h4, g5. It's not clear that h4, g5 is actually going to improve white's position. But when we look at it, it's kind of like, well, the only natural break in the position for white. And so that is what white's mind is going to be intuitively drawn to. And that's a real trick about the space. It's not about breaking pawn breaks. It's about controlling the black pieces. And that's why, yeah, space is such an art. And I feel like if I had had a teacher as a kid, it would have helped me so much just to say, oh, right, you don't, it's not the breaks that you're interested in, son, because the breaks, pawns aren't people. It's about which pieces are free to come out. Okay, so let's look at what happened. Knight f8, reasonable move. Bishop d7. I'm not sure I totally get bishop d7. And I definitely don't get bishop d2. Queen c8. And now we're going to get this very... White's basically going to follow through on his plans here. And black is going to come up with a real stunning puzzle rush style tactic here. But we should say, when we look at the black position, that even though we've pushed him back, all of a sudden his pieces are starting to make sense. And that's what's, frightening. Whereas the white pieces don't really know what they're doing, especially the bishop on h1. And we're going to talk more about that bishop in a second. So, queen h5, bishop g4, queen h4, and now the beautiful, the miraculous knight g5. Very impressive move. Bishop g5, knight g6, and now bishop takes. And this is a beautiful 3 pieces versus the queen situation where black has an extra pawn. Okay, so I'm going to stress this is a very hard position to evaluate. And let's say the obvious, that white's goal should be the coordination of his pieces. And that's really going to be the question of how powerful the the white position is can the pieces coordinate? And now I know that many people, including some GMs, would just rather have the queen here because it's just a much harder job for for white to coordinate his pieces. And it's so easy for something to go wrong, as happens in this game. So let's take a look. I like black's first move a lot. Put our pawns on dark, bishop on light. And the pawns, of course, on dark are blocking out white's unopposed bishop on h4. Okay, now decision time. And Dora writes about either f3 or bishop f3. And I have some sympathy for f3, but we have to say to ourselves, if the bishop on h1 isn't coming out, then we want to be real wary of f3. Bishop f3, on the other hand, certainly feels right. There's question marks are still abounding, but that's certainly what feels right in this position, and then followed up maybe with something like king e2. I think, honestly, probably the game's roughly balanced, but I really do enjoy black's extra pawn. Right? Imagine we just sit, play a move like king e7, for example. We can take on g4, but we're inviting that vampire to the wedding, right? And we can sit, but we're also just kind of waiting. So very interesting strategic game here. Also, what happens in the game is interesting. Bishop d7. Let's say the obvious. The bishop on d7 is a good bishop. And I think white's intention here was to say, all right, I am going to play for getting my knight to f5. And it's not a dumb plan, but I think one of the problems for white is that he's not hyper-focused on fixing the bishop on h1. Okay. Queen h8. So here she comes. Here she comes. And a6. Now, one of the things that I didn't understand in how Black played this position is he had several opportunities to play b5. And to me, it just makes sense for Black to play b5. And it's just a headache for White to have that sitting over there. And definitely, I think after b5, now we got to say Black is better. This is all a discoordinated mess over here with these pieces. Okay, rook h8, king d2. I'm not sure about g5. To me, still b5. I don't know why Black isn't doing it. And you're right, you didn't have a plan. Right, and I think you got to play like bishop g3. Get that queen out of there, man. Get him out. Get him out. Okay. Knight g3. I don't know what Black is doing. I don't know why he didn't play b5. Okay. Finally it happens. And unfortunately for White, right, this is exactly the terror of playing these kinds of positions with the pieces, is if your pieces don't find coordination, it's really rough. They can fall off the board at any point. And Black is a lot easier to play Black, right? He's just sitting there with his queen and his rook, waiting for an opportunity to come in. And he finds it here nicely. You achieve knight f5, but now it's, that rook is strong, and bishop g3 is certainly the move we'd all like to play, and I'm assuming there's some time pressure, and then bam, queen h3. Nice move. And now I guess it's lost. And that's the danger of this kind of position. Okay, let's move on. Now I'm going to jump scenes for a second to move the hand. And I'm not going to forget. I'm not going to forget. As you might have noticed, it was Hughes who was against Naka, and Tim. The next 3 games, I assume, were all played on the Dojo, through the Dojo Discord. We have a ladder there, and we have round-robin tournaments. You might still be able to get into the round-robin now. I believe sign-ups might still be happening. Anyways, we have various round-robins at different skill levels. And the beauty of our business, I think, one of the things that we're doing well, I think, with the Chess Dojo, is we're doing these tournaments with people that I don't think would necessarily cheat, and who people know. So there's like a social atmosphere to to people hanging out after the game and talking about it. Obviously it's all online and everything. But anyways, these next 3 games were played through that arrangement. And so it's kind of cool is that I've gone over all 6 of these players' games before at some point. Okay, so I'm not going to forget to go back. And here we go. So this is Tim, who I believe is, I forget if it was Denmark or Sweden, but he's in Scandinavia. And here we go. And I'm just going to say this has to be Kostya's fault. Kostya, for his own psychological reasons and, problems, has been doing this setup, and it's costing a lot of people sleep at night and making the world a worse place. But here it is, this 2 nights tango thing or whatever. Chess.com is calling it the Nimzovich defense declined. It's the Kostya defense. This is the Kostya. Okay, so here we go. Bishop g4, loads of different moves that can be played here. And the idea, Tim didn't like it too much, this bishop g4, but the idea, I think, and Black doesn't do it this way, so maybe I have the idea wrong, is if necessary, snip on f3 and then hope to transfer the game into like a French structure, though I guess there's no rush. So here we go. Bishop e3, bishop e7, Queen d2, a6. We'll talk about a6 in a second. We might come back to it. h3. And here I felt that bishop h5 was a mistake on principle, insofar as I don't know if you want to be, in general, you should be trading when you have less space, right? Now, we've now reached the, let's call it the decisive moments of the game, and I'm not sure either player felt it, but definitely here's some interesting moments. And g4 is what I would like to play. Unclear, though, if I'm able to. So let's look at what happened. g4, bishop g6, bishop d3, and I think black is in a little trouble here. I'm going to say that after castles, I'm just going to say it's probably lost. Now, maybe that's too harsh, actually. Maybe I'll end up taking that back. The thing I didn't like, let's just say the obvious first. We're going to have a vicious game here with attacks on both sides, and white, of course, is better developed. Now, maybe I was wrong about this, but my sense was that h4 was going to be very strong. Let's just check it out for a second. So h4. Maybe black can try to survive, actually, with d5. I was thinking about that as I was talking about it. It might be true. It's gonna be a fright. It is going to be a fright. Well, yeah, maybe I was too hasty about it. It still looks very frightening, but yeah, maybe this is something that can be played. Okay, no, maybe I'm wrong there. So we get this position, and castles is by all means, the move with the most cojones on it. And this is white's big moment to prove or not prove that he's in charge. And he plays castles. Yeah, this is a tough one. I'd really like to play h4 almost anyway. It's just what I want to do. Let's just say that after castles b5, we have ourselves a really interesting attack on both wings kind of scenario. And the thing about knight h4, which was called a blunder, the thing we should say about it, I think, is that even if it didn't blow a pawn here, that I'm not sure this is what white wants, to play knight h4 takes g6, because that piece is kind of like the piece that we were dominating in the first place. And black, of course, is going to be doing his own drama against us on the queen side. That said, right, not super easy to know what we are supposed to do in this position, because h4 will now be met with b4. Actually, I'll take a guess on this, is that g5 seems at least reasonable, where this knight will move somewhere, and then we can play knight e2, presumably knight h5, and when he kicks us, we can play knight e2, and we'll just be holding that space advantage. So again, another position where we're talking about the space advantage. Okay, now, Tal once said that he liked to fall for his opponent's tricks, and in some ways that applies to this position, where black takes it, and at the very least white has now some compensation for this, because, as we've talked on the show before, when you have castling on opposite sides, the initiative is more important than it usually is, and the pawns are less important. So I believe in black's position here, but it's not super easy for him to play because it's now not so easy to start the drama on the white king as it once was. And black makes a mistake with knight d4. And for whatever reason, Tim doesn't play knight c5, which he, I think, correctly says would have been a promising position. Definitely looks promising. Yeah, definitely looks promising. There's a variety of ways to play this position. Even the ending with bishop g6 is much better for white. Okay, so bishop f2, and he misses c4. And now we're just going to get a mess. And we're going to guess that black is simply winning here. But it gets weird. It gets weird. Queen h6. Oh my god. Oh my lordy. Okay. Bishop g6. Bishop h4. Hui. Queen c7. And I guess black is winning in this position. That's a guess. But definitely knight f6 was a nice trick to try. And right, the question is, after knight f6, does white have anything after king h8? And I think the answer is no. We're threatening the queen. We're threatening the pawn on c2. Yeah, and it looks real bad. And Tim gives a variation, but one of the ways to talk about the position actually is just to say, even if we don't understand what's going on after queen d2, that white doesn't have a way to attack the dark squares, in particular g7, and he doesn't have any touch onto the light squares, obviously. So the bishop on g6 is a truly unopposed piece. Okay, so gf, c3, queen c5, some tricky moves, and Tim finds some nice calculation here. Bishop f6. You can have my rook, and Kostya, the evil genius that he is, has conned me into doing a lot of puzzle rush, and this certainly looks like one of those puzzle rush positions. Okay, so Jackson Chess's Hughes. I had a feeling. Great. So, all right, let's move on to the next dojo battle. This is Bubba Tuff and Nicholas. Nicholas is from Sweden, and Bubba I know from childhood. Bubba is a pretty strong 2300 player. And let's take a look at how this goes. The famous exchange Slav, and let's just say it's never an easy game. People think it's going to be boring or something. I've never had a boring exchange Slav game. They're always really messy and tactical, and this game is no exception. So a6 is a known. There's so many ideas for black here, by the way. Oh my, just so many different things that he can try. And white does an interesting attempt. Basically, the idea of a6 is to wait a little bit, and if knight f3, to play bishop g4 now. At least that's my understanding of this move order. So white plays bishop e2, and well, he has an idea. How good of an idea it is, that's an interesting question. But the idea is, after bishop f5, is g4 going to be a genius level move? Maybe. Maybe. So bishop e2, interesting at the very least. Actually kind of too cool that we talked about Tim's game before, because there's similar ideas with messing with the bishop on g6 and of space. Okay. So really, you kind of sort of have to play bishop g6, but you could also have played bishop e4. And I think bishop e4 would be, white's going to play f3 anyway. I'm not sure it changes anything. But anyways, bishop g6, h4, and now a big question. What does black do? He plays h6. Okay. Tim, you said h5c the next game. I don't know which game that is, but, excuse me, Nicholas, I don't know what game the next game is with h5. Here we go. Queen b3, and this is a fascinating position. As I said, these things are never easy peasy. And the problem is if black plays queen d7, he has to worry about things like knight a4. So, and if b5, you got to wonder, does knight takes b5 knock me out? That's the problem of the bishop being on the other side of the pawn chain, is that, if we get a bishop here, it might not be so pleasant for a pheasant. So, black does this, and white essentially won a tempo. But the problem for white now, as in a lot of these exchange Slav games, is just the simple question. What do you do? Not super easy. All right, so rook c1, e6. Like Dora's game, white has to make some judgment calls about how to play the position. And this one, bishop f3, like Dora's game, remarkable actually how similar it is, right? And I assume that part of the intention is to play g5, but also to play knight e2. And it certainly doesn't feel right, especially because the bishop on f3 is hitting that rock on d5. Okay, now things start to get really weird at this point. By the way, I stared at this a little bit, and although I'm convinced that bishop f3 is a poor move, I don't really know what else to do. And I can feel white's pain because the rook c1 move also felt like a move where Sam didn't quite know what to do there either. All right, so bishop f3, rook c8, kind of weird. And Tim writes about there's some ghosts about playing bishop d6. Bishop e7 also makes a lot of sense to me. And one move here that comes up a lot in these exchange Slav positions is knight d7. It's generally a pretty good move. At some point you will be, thinking about knight b6, b5, and yeah, knight d7's got to be a good move. All right, rook c8. Again, kind of like Bubba's move with rook c1, doesn't know quite where it's headed yet. Actually, I'm going to give a suggestion for white. In this position, I think white should play either f3 and king f2, or king f1, king g2. Something like that. All right. Bishop e7, I still think that's okay. And one of the things about this knight g3 move that's weird is it's not clear where it's going, right? Very unclear where it's going. So, and that's going to kind of haunt white for the rest of the next couple moves. It's like, what is the knight actually wanting to do over there? And like these other games, very much a game of space, where black is going to need to, maybe worry a little bit, but come up with some active counterplay. Now, my sense is that knight d7 here would be better for black. At the very least, I don't know what white's supposed to do, and black has very typical ideas with b5 and, knight b6, all that kind of stuff. In addition, we got to say the bishop on g6 is certainly looking like a good piece. Yeah. So it's a kind of mystery here what black does. Guess I was about to say obviously, but yeah, I guess obviously at some level distraught at the nature of the position. Plays king f8. Truly pretty weird. Was definitely worried about some things that are, I don't know what they are. So one of the weird things is generally king f8 would be such a chess crime that black would be losing, but white still doesn't really have a plan going forward, not that I can see. And I guess my sense he should still be playing like king f1 to g2. But instead, we go back, and black gets some time, and fix the knight, kind of mildly similar to the knight d7. f3, I don't understand that move. In general, let's just say that in these systems with a6, when white backs off or creates no progress on the queen side, black will, in his turn, eventually start creating his own drama. So at least the thematic move is what I would call it, would be the move b5 here. It is true that we want to fix the king on e7, but bishop f6, I don't know. All right, knight a4. One of the reasons actually about b5 is just to stop knight a4. Knight a4 is a reasonable move. At least it gives him something to do, right? Queen a4. All right, now it's getting spicy. Rook d8. I have a lot of tactical questions here, but let's just put this on the board. e5, rook b3, queen a7, and Nicholas gets on his own case here about this move, but I think it's certainly intuitive to put the queen on a7, and I don't think that was his actual mistake. So he gives a line with queen c7, but I still think black, at the very least, his position makes far more sense than white's position. Knight d3, and we gotta believe in your position here. You're touching so many beautiful squares. The rook on b3 is a tourist. Your queen's looking at f2. Definitely intuitive to put the queen on a7. A bunch of variations were given, but rook c4 is certainly intuitive. And now you were surprised by this move, which threatens knight d5. But there's still every reason to think black is better. And as you write, queen c5, of course, we'd rather be white. And nota bene, the knight on g3 is terrible. Our king has survived its king f8 e7 business, and no one really knows exactly what those pieces over there on b4 and d5, what all those guys are doing. At least I don't know. Okay. Let's see what happens. I think it falls apart very quickly. Yeah. Now I guess we're just worse. And I guess it ended. No time left. Okay. Let's move on to Say Chess against Mitch Fabian. Actually, the next two guys here, this is Say Chess submitted this game, but I just started this new series called Meet the Dojo, and in one episode, I interviewed Mitch, and Vishnu's game is next, and I did Vishnu in the next one. I probably won't be able to do a new one, though I'm eager to, in the next couple weeks, because I'm doing this GM in residence for the St. Louis Chess Club, where they're just working me to the bone. Working me to the bone. But anyways, I will do more of those, but check out the interviews. You can see the paths to chess that both Mitch and Vishnu took. Very interesting for me to just talk about people's lives that also just interesting. I've known most of these guys, not in real life, and so I don't really feel I had a sense of them until the interviews. And also remarkable to me how similar their lives are, even though Vishnu, of course, was born in India, in a completely different place in the world. All right, let's get into it. So Mitch, gotta say, has been crushing it recently. And what I hadn't really appreciated until I did the interview is that Mitch really was like, I'd done this thing a lot of chess players happened in their lives where they played maybe in school here and there, but didn't have the time, didn't feel like they had the time. Whereas bums like me, we just stopped doing everything in the world to play some chess. But I didn't have the time, and through high school and college, made it to only like 1,700. But actually played, I looked him up, he actually played a lot of tournaments. And now, I think Mitch wins the award, at least in my eyes, for most improved, if indeed 1,700 was his true strength at the beginning, because now Mitch has been killing dudes. Mitch has just been slaughtering it. And he still has some work to do on his game, but my guess is that, he's intending to make 2,200 when he comes out of lockdown. And honestly, from most of the games I've seen Mitch play, I don't see any reason to doubt it. Okay, many ways to play against the QGA. E3, knight c3, e6, bishop c4. Oh, I have to make a note here. So, in general, knight c3 is going to be inaccurate because the knight will be a victim to a6, b5, b4, right? So it's best to leave knight c3 alone for several moves and do first like bishop c4, knight f3, castles, queen e2, whatever, whatever happens, you do that first. Right, because knight c3 will, it's not the end of the world, but it's inaccurate. And we're going to talk a little bit more about it. a6, castles, b5, and now an interesting moment that I'm going to say is interesting for my own chess career, where, I'll just tell a little story that has to do with something that's going to be very similar to this position. I played in the U.S. Championship in I'm going to get the move order wrong too, but it's okay. I played the U.S. Championship 2002 and was paired against Yasser Seirawan. And he surprised me with something like this. And I played this weenie move. A6 happened. A3. And this is a known deal. And we got snip, snop, b5, bishop a2, bishop b7, castles, knight d7. Okay. Now, I should say the clever thing that Seirawan is doing here is he's preserving the option of the knight to go to d7, where it will not be in the way of the bishop. And you can contrast that to a position like a3, knight c6, which has been seen a gazillion times in GM play for, centuries. Not centuries, plural, century. Anyway, so that's the trick. And what I got out of it in analyzing it later was, and this kind of goes to the heart of when I talk about pawns aren't people, I did some jerky thing here where I played I think it actually went like queen e2 and then I was playing for d5, and let's say the reason this is Dorkfest Phantasmal is because I'm not fixing my bishop on c1, and instead I'm playing for some pawn structure thing. I became worse in the game. I ended up drawing, but that's not the point. It was a dumb plan. And this is going to apply to what happens in Say Chess's game, at least I hope it does, where I said to myself after, I was like, you know what? E4, for sure, is the move that you want to play, Kraai. If you want, you could play Queen E2 and then E4. But E4, what a great move. And fulfills all the requirements of the position. I get the bishop out. If he wants to take that pawn, you can have that pawn, Sarwan. And I would have been, of course, just aesthetically so pleasing to beat that guy for all the pawn grubbing that he does. That would have been very satisfying. And in hindsight, I felt like in this position, black shouldn't mess with the pawn at all and play something like takes, and we get some position, and then, fiddle stiddle, but we have a dynamic position for white, and maybe white's a little bit better. But he would have taken the pawn. Dude would have taken the pawn, and then I would have crushed him. Okay, so anyways, one of the things about this move E4 is when you're playing a game, of course you can't know all the complications. He's got B4, he's got knight E4. He could take the thing a gazillion different ways. You just got to say to yourself, it's insane for him to take the pawn. That's all you have to know. That's the only thing you have to know. Yeah, people are saying, yes, takes this. No question, absolutely. And right, not a good decision. Anyways, let's go back to the game. And the reason I brought this all up is because you, of course, now here, Say Chess, can play E4 in this position. And real interesting and spicy. And you could play Queen E2 first if you wanted to, and then E4. But, break with E4 by all means. All right, now this Bishop D3 move, not terrible. And A3 is interesting, and here Mitch makes a mistake. And this is actually the kind of thing where Mitch can certainly improve. So let's just say, like in my game, it's hard now for white to fix the problem of the bishop on C1. And A3 is not the most beautiful move in this position that you can imagine. However, if black takes, well, then we have to say the pawn on A3 certainly makes a lot of sense. And in general, in isolated queen-pawn positions, A3 is always useful to prevent the knight B4s of the world and all kinds of other junk happening to us on B4, as well as our light square bishop often can use those beautiful squares to his advantage. So, right, and Say Chess correctly writes, knight D7 makes a lot of sense. Keep the tension, don't let the bishop out. Mitch, if you're watching, don't let the bishop out, buddy. Okay. Bishop, and this is actually a great example of pawns aren't people, because Mitch is thinking, I think, to himself in his head, is like, oh, I want to attain that isolated queen pawn as something of triumph, to say I've got something. Well, what white has is the bishop on C1. Now, here's a position. Of all the positions today that I looked at, I spent the most time on this one. I didn't know. I didn't know what to do. There are a variety of moves to play here. I believe in white's position. Not that I believe he's winning or anything. Maybe just slightly better. But I've been in positions like this myself, and it's often very difficult to know which plan to choose here. For example, you can go Queen E2, Rook D1. You can play Bishop G5. You can aim for a Knight E5 move. And the key point is to say is that our pawn on D4 is a bully. He's the center pawn. No one else gets a center pawn except white. And it's only later, if black trades off a bunch of stuff, that he will become powerful. I mean, he will become a weakness, excuse me. So, I I don't have a strong sense, I'm going to say that, but I felt like rook e1 and knight e5 appeal to me most. The problem with queen e2, rook d1 is I don't really want to put my a rook on c1. You know, I feel like the rooks ideally want to be like on rook e1 and rook d1. But there's the problem that Seychess has in this position as well, is where do I put the bishop on c1? Hard to say. Seychess, by the way, I want to give him some props. You can check out his blog, and also he's got some cool YouTube videos. Also someone who is trying to make the big jump in terms of chess progress. Okay. Actually, you know what? I'm going to cheat. I haven't cheated all day. I'm going to cheat a touch. I just want to see which plan the computer likes and what it thinks. All right. It wants rook e1. You know what, though? It's saying, like, equal. Rook e1, bishop g5. Maybe a touch better for white now. Okay. So Mitch wins again. Mitch wins again. And it also mentions bishop f4, which is the move that Seychess believes he maybe should have done. So bishop e3 is awkward because you are going to be blocking the rook on f1 from doing stuff. And it's not clear what it wants to do there besides being a supplicant for the pawn. Nimzovich liked to play, and a lot of the old masters like to play bishop e3 in these positions as well. And one of the ideas, I think, and this can kind of happen in the game, is that if black goes on an adventure and tries to, take our bishop on e3 with a knight, say, then we'll open up the f-file for the rook and have some dynamic play and some dynamic hanging pawns. Okay, castles. And now queen c2. Interesting. Interesting. And here I like a lot what Mitch did. Yes, he could have taken on f3, and I'm sure there was some very reasonable players that would. But Mitch just does this, and what I like about it is he's saying the main problem you've got is when my rook lands on c8, the queen is going to be uncomfortable. Okay. And here, Seychess, one of the things I want to first commiserate, right, with you is that you found it difficult to find a plan, and it's 3 moves in a row which are a little hokey, right? Bishop e3, queen c2, and now knight g5. Where knight g5 in particular shows that, yeah, things didn't go well because you're not doing anything over there. Okay. You noted correctly, though, that after knight e5, you still have a really interesting position with ideas maybe like f4 at some point. So that is definitely, still a very interesting position for you. Okay, so knight g4, h6, knight e4, rook c8, queen d2, and here I like your comment a lot. You write, the IQP should avoid trades and the side playing against it should seek them. That's absolutely right. And here, Mitch, I totally take the thing. So let me say a little bit why the rule makes sense and what maybe the plan's thoughts should be behind both players. The isolated queen's pawn's power is really to dominate some of the black minors as a central force. And a lot of times that domination can lead to an attack. If you lose the minors, then there's nothing to dominate. And then the pawn starts feeling truly lonely. And the big breakthrough for me, and the old masters knew this really well, is white really needs to fear a heavy middle game with like the rooks pounding onto d4. It's very unpleasant, very hard to hold because, it's going to be near impossible to keep the pawn because you imagine the rooks doubled on the d file, no minors on the board, you got to worry about e5. It's going to be a hard road. So that's the fear. And I think in general, it's fair to say that when you think about the isolated queen pawn, through history, the old timers wanted to play against it more because it was a static weakness, and more and more chess is being seen through the lens of active play. And an example actually would be Kasparov playing the Tarrasch system in the 80s. And that leads, of course, to the computer age where the computer is playing active chess as well. And in that case, we want the pawn because it's it's a dynamic weakness. So here, definitely a mistake from Mitch, knight g4. And Mitch is now going to do some very strange things. Bishop f4, f5. Basically, now it's Mitch's turn to lose his mind. No one knows. Knight d6, snip, snip. And Martin, a.k.a. Say Chess, writes, I felt that I had a great position, but it seems like I overestimated my real advantage. Now, I definitely think you have a great position. Maybe the interesting question is how good is it? It's definitely good. It's just how good is it? Is maybe our task to figure out right now. You have a beautiful position now because your king is better and because you have the beautiful unopposed bishop there on d6. f5 is truly, Mitch just, knight g4 and f5. Mistakes come in pairs. He lost his mind. It happens to everybody. So, here we go for white. I'm sure you have multiple moves. Let me suggest that at least the move I'd like to make intuitively is not h3, which is what you played, but f3. And maybe we don't even have to touch the knight, but I just want to express why I like f3. And that is because the pawn on d4 I'm not too worried about because that's our color. We own the dark squares. And f3 will limit the scope of the bishop on b7. Okay, but that said, I still liked h3. And now knight b6. And the real crime, Martin, of bishop f4, you're still doing great, but is that you're losing time. And so you write bishop c5 seem better. Definitely. I mean, you're doing great. Also interesting, though, would have been trying to knock him apart like that. At the very least, interesting. I'm not exactly sure what's going on. In any case, you're still doing well, but the problem now is, are you going to be able to keep your beautiful bishop on f4? Because now it's going to get hit someday with a knight d7. And honestly, here, I didn't really like Mitch's next move, knight fd5. It seems to me, if I was black, I would really want to get rid of that thing on e5. And so, at the very least, my first intuition would be that move. Now, let's look. Knight fd5. And I'm not sold on rook ac1. Okay. So, the question becomes, what do we do? And you can see, by the way, why I want f3, right? Because I want to deal with the bishop on b7, which is eventually going to be a pain. Let's just do what you did. I guess I would rather play rook e1, because I'm not really afraid of knight c3, and you should be taking pawn takes c3. If, queen d5 will just play f3. If knight c4 will take it. And I think it's fair to say that your bishop is in that position better than the bishop on b7. The bishop on e5 is an absolute beast. And now we get to keep it. On knight d7 or whatever, we're going to just move it back. So, and by the way, hanging pawns are a cousin of the IQP, in the sense not only do they evolve from one to the other, but it's similar in that it's a dynamic weakness. Because because it controls the center, but is also weak. Okay, so rook c3, and now queen d5, f3, knight d7. Now it's a little bit unpleasant. Okay, now here's an interesting business. First, I don't know if you need to take on c8. And now you play queen e2 and you wanted queen e3. And the point would be, let's look at this, knight e5, d e5, and life isn't so bad. And if knight e5, wait, so let me just make sure I understand, 'cause maybe I don't get it totally. Queen e2, knight e5, d e5. Is something terrible happening to you here? I might be missing something myself. Right? I don't know. Seems like black's better because your bishop on d3 is funky, but you know, you're not going to lose anything. Queen e5. And now, this is a really interesting position to me. Rook d8 was played, after which he's definitely better. But even queen e5, rook d8 is going to be good for him as well. The problem is your bishop is not working, right? Now, let's read what you wrote. I now expect it to be grinded down. And let's say, I'm getting a surprising amount of mileage out of the Skelfen book. I don't think you're lost here. I think you're worse, and let me just explain just intuitively why I would say that. In general, I think in order to be winning, black is going to need two weaknesses. And at the moment, he just has a pawn, so that's one weakness. In addition, your king is pretty nice. Pretty nice king, right? So, yeah, I don't think you should be that distraught about this particular position. All right, here we go. Rook d8. And given that Mitch is about to play rook d7, it's clear that he should have played rook d7. Boom. Boom. And now an interesting business where he's given you some time, and right, there should be a way for you to have counterplay. You write about a4, definitely. That should be on your mind because he has one piece that isn't working. So it makes sense that you should be able to do something. And basically a way to conceive of the position, I think, is to say to yourself, oh, my problem in life is that my bishop is hitting a wall on both sides of the board. So the two moves that should float through your mind are a4 and also g4. g4 is a little more spooky because you're playing on his strong side of the board and maybe he can throw some f4 business at you. But I'm just trying to say both of those moves are what you should be thinking about because they open the scope of the pieces. Say Chess is saying queen d4 if I do it the other way. Let's see what he's saying. So d e5, queen d4, I go away. I mean, it's definitely better for black, but it's not toast, right? Yeah. Okay. So let's look at what happened. King e3, rook d7, and now this is going to be an example of us kind of fading away, and it's very similar to the game that Jackson Chess had against Naka, where he's just going to make a couple moves that are going to slip by, and that's going to give black the time to coordinate his position, in particular his king. And I think it's an obvious thing to say, but time is always important, and there's no reason to think that it's less important in the ending. Maybe more so, especially when we imagine black having three dudes, the king, the rook, and the bishop, and one of them is currently not really working that well. So bishop b1, bishop a2, and I don't understand h4 either, honestly, because you're playing on his strong side of the board. Again, I would be dreaming about g4. Even though I just said you shouldn't play on his strong side of the board, I get it. But I just want to stress, we need to, it's hard now to do something because he's consolidated the position. Maybe still some kind of a4, honestly. We got to do something. We got to create drama before it all goes bad. Bishop d5, definitely an awkward move. And let's just say the thought for black here should be to put a pawn on f4. And I guess the easy way of doing that would just be play e5, f4, fix the weaknesses, make the king bad, put the pawns in the opposite color as the bishop. Very nice attacking position on our strong side of the board. G5 also makes some sense. All right, so snip, snip. And now we have counterplay. And again, it's only, you know, black only has one advantage. Rook a6. And I agree, we need to do something more productive in this position. Black, it's still unpleasant. It's still unpleasant. And of course, the thing that you're doing here is we can say is you're sliding. Again, because a4 is a move that black would like to do anyway. It's very helpful to black that his pawns are closer to the end of the board. Okay. Now, I think this is lost as it stands. But of course, it requires some work from black. And the real reason is I think he should be able to organize two connected passers on the king side. And it's, of course, very hard for you to do anything on the queen side. The pawn on a4, truly a great pawn, right? So that's a mistake, and Mitch finishes it off nicely now. I'm not totally convinced by the e4 thing, by the way. But here we go. Oh, yeah, Mitch blew it here. What is he doing? What is he doing? Yeah, what are we doing? King g3, and it's not totally over. I just assumed it was over. I just, when I saw that position, I had stopped looking at the game. I didn't even realize there was more to it than that. Yeah, of course you have a chance here. The king's out in the boondocks way over there on b8. Oh, man, I don't know. This is all this variation that could have happened. Okay, in the game, king e3 was played. And right, this is a known win here. Having everything to do with the unpleasantness of pawns on opposite sides of the board. Okay, let's head on to the famous Vishnu. Okay, so Vishnu got to play a couple weeks ago a real over-the-board event, probably the last one for months, and kind of cool. He's playing the tournament director's daughter. Tournament director is this really cool guy who's been putting on some tournaments in the DC area for several years. And yeah, so I know Asa at least by sight. And she plays a pretty good game here, so let's look how it goes. Vishnu's been playing this system for a while, and it's pretty cool. Where white is going to be grabbing this space on the king side. And like we said, you know, it's a hard business to play this kind of thing correctly. let's say that Vishnu's next couple moves look good to me. And now bishop d7. Vishnu says c6 maybe. Bishop d7 is pretty thematic. And bishop e2, a4. And here, Vishnu correctly says, let's read what he wrote. h4 and g5 were possible, but like I said, I wanted to play slow and control the game. I've gotten comfortable with playing with the space advantage, and that often involves controlling the game. So I think queen d2, I think, first of all, beautiful opening so far, but queen d2 is definitely where I feel like you are going to start losing the thread. And with h4, my sense of that is that h4, h5 is not just about space, but it actually makes black playing f5 even more difficult. And so, in my old-timer way of appreciating how to think about this position, it's about what you're doing on the king's side is prophylaxis. You're stopping black from doing her amazing f5 plan. And so h4, h5 looks aggressive, of course. And one of the nice things about the idea of Nimzovich and prophylaxis was that stopping our opponent from doing what she wants to do is an aggressive act, and the prevention will ultimately turn into an aggressive action on its own. And you can really see it clearly with the move h4, h5 here. Maybe sometimes it's helpful to just look at comparable positions, and one I'm a little bit familiar with is here. Sometimes they do like that, or knight e8, and I know here that h4 is very pleasant here too. And the point is, yeah, once we get h5 in, we're really going to not only develop the rook, but that f5 will become far less plausible. Okay. So, right. Queen d2 is going to give her the time, and I like a lot what she does. This plan that she does here, let's just put some moves on the board. Beautiful. And this is the plan that was developed, I'm going to say in the 1950s, by the Soviets against the Samish system, like here with the pawn on f3. And it, in its own way, has to do with prophylaxis, because white's strong side is, of course, the queen side. But if black can set that knight up on c5 and stick it there and gain all the space with b5, b4, well, surprisingly, it's the case that black can shut down white's ambitions over there. Let's play a couple more moves. b4, knight d1. And here she starts to go wrong. Yeah, Yaz doesn't like Nimzovich. Well, that's a whole different discussion. I'm not even going to go there today. So here, in this position, I think one of the reasons that she gets a little bit misled is when you play b5, b4, it feels like maybe I, black, am doing the aggressive action over there on the queen side. But as we see in the game, got to be real careful, because white is the one who still has the bigger force count over on the queen side, right? All this business is over here. That's my strong side of the board. My pawns are pointing that way, right? And so I think Vishnu is absolutely correct to recommend bishop f8 here with just this old-timey plan of fixing the bishop, trading it off for this white's best piece. Very positional, very correct. And yeah, I'd rather be black there because the knight on g3 is no one's big friend if we're not doing anything over there, and black has stopped the play on the queen side. Okay, so like I said, I think her mistake here was dreaming about her own play, and now she's dreaming about knight d7. And here, I'm going to say that yeah, it's already a little bit of a bummer here, and taking is just not what she wanted to happen, because we really don't want to give up our c5 square. And I'm just going to imagine that she missed this. And so when we look, boom, boom, now things like a3 are in the offing, and the b4 pawn is a little loose. This is all because the knight on c5 is gone. And black clearly has two pieces that have not been fixed. This is a mistake, but right, Vishnu writes rook b7. That's obviously not the happiest day for black. We got to play that move. So snip, snip, a3. It's our side of the board, my friends. That's my side. All right, here we go. And Vishnu finishes it off nicely here. It's not just a pawn, it's access to the queen side. Black is a little slow, and we're in time pressure here. Vishnu is going to make some funky moves, as is she. F5 is a little bit... oh, and this we got to give him a pass. He touched his bishop or something. He ends up taking this thing. I don't know if I take on a4, letting the queen in. That's a little bit much for my taste. Anyways, game score is lost here. Vishnu goes on to win. Very instructive game. Okay. So now we're moving on to chess gains. And we don't have the names here because Chess Games just dumped a file on me over there. But I said, all right, Chess Games, you did some good work with your annotations. I'm going to work to make this file work. And Chess Gains was part of our Ultimate Sensei experiment. And so that was where we had teams hooked up with a trainer, and they had several weeks to train. And he was one of my picks from the beginning. We had like a draft, and Chess Gains had these cool dark glasses, and I was like, no one's going to mess with Chess Gains. So that was how I picked Chess Games after Mitch to win the tournament. And he did all right. He didn't get, I don't think he got second, but he still did all right. And that's my cue to go over here and say we're out of the Dojo fight games. And now we're coming up on several endgames. And the first one isn't actually an endgame, but it is part of the endgame series in that Chess Games is going to use, I almost didn't switch back, he is going to use this opening that I called an endgame repertoire for black. And white here plays knight f3. Okay. So he is clearly unprepared for what he's calling the rat. I don't like calling it the rat, but okay. Yeah, the chess.com calls it the rat. It's funny, with the chess.com has started to be like the monopoly on naming chess openings. A lot of times they're just making that stuff up back in the back room or something. I don't know where they come up with a lot of these names. The rat, to me, is a totally different opening, but we can get to that another time. Okay. In the third part I did of the video series, I also recommended e4, though there are several ways to play the position. You could also play knight d7. This move e4 leads to a very unbalanced game here. Knight g5, f5, knight c3, knight f6, f3. Little controversial f3. And I want to say, I don't regret suggesting e4, but I do think that this plan for black does involve some skill. That's then be both tactical and positional skill. And this decision I stared at a bit myself because I wasn't sure. it seemed like we either wanted to play h6 or just take on f3. Taking on f3 is would be a hard move to make because I don't even know which way white should take back. He's got several ways to take the pawn back. I wasn't even sure, but I did feel like black was fine. In any case, h6 was all right. c6. And for the next several moves, Chess Games mentions that he should play bishop e6 to meet knight f4 with bishop f7, and that does make sense to me. So, right, probably knight f4 for white there, probably knight f4 again. In any case, now it happens, and we're going to get this interesting position, and let's just say it's like a reversed French, right? And Chess Games makes the, let's call it the intuitive capture, FE. I stared at this one a little bit too. DE possible, right? D is possible. Boom. And now A4. Now this is white's big moment. And I should mention Chess Games is black. Maybe I'll flip this board here. So this is white's big moment, and I'm not exactly sure what the guy should do. I do believe in black, and the space advantage is pretty nice here. And the main move that black should be considering on every move is g5. Does g5 work? Okay. a4. So he's doing this thing that as a French player, I generally don't usually approve of, right? What he's going to do is he's going to spend 1,000 tempos to trade off the bishop on c1. Now, is it a bad idea to trade off? Of course not. No, it's not a bad idea. But you are going to have a funny rook on a3. So knight a6 and knight d7, also a move, of course. Bishop a3. Snip, snip, and here, if I remember right, I had a genius moment. I don't always have genius moments, but I think I had a genius moment here. The rook on a3 is a funny customer, and so now is our moment to play g5. Exclam! I don't always find good moves, but when I do, they're with Chess Games. So the point is that I think he's going to have to play knight h3. So let's go into it. It would be like this. Knight h5, snip. I don't think it matters which way we snip. Snip, snip. And here's the cold truth, is that if he takes this one, we got that zapper. And if he takes this one, we got this zapper. Now, am I absolutely convinced that he's not going to get a, what do we call it? We usually call it a, a perpetual check. I'm not entirely convinced, but I don't think he is. I don't think he is. So I think this is winning. Anyways, I was very happy with discovering this queen f8 idea, just because even earlier I was thinking to myself, the only real plan for black is to play g5. So this then gives us the opportunity. And in general, I'm always suspicious of the rook over there. Okay, so ein Dauerschach, that's right. Now, one thing about knight b4, and I'm going to guess that that was your intention when you played knight a6, is it's kind of a tourist over there, right? It's not entirely clear what it's doing. And yeah, I don't know if white should even bother with knight a2, but it is true that that was his worst piece, and he does want to trade some stuff off. And now, you know, he gets to do so. And here, I'm worried for Chess Games a little bit because, yeah, things are looking like they've gone white's way. And Yeah, the rook on a2 at some point, if it finds its way to f2, it could be unpleasant. So b6, and now I don't like what white did, queen e1. And right, Chess Gains notes that after queen e1, we could have played g5 for the domination of the knight. What white should do, interesting question. CD might be a simple thing to do, just to ask him the question. And yeah, I think that's pleasant for white. I don't know which way black should take back, but let's just for kicks say CD. Now white has a lot more squares at his disposal. And he's got at least 3 moves that pop out at me with bishop g4, rook c2, and maybe even bishop b5. All these moves are at least thoughts that he can entertain. Okay, so queen e1 mistake. And I'll tell you, mess with Chess Gains, he's going to hurt you. So here we go, c5. Is it complicated? You bet. Do I know what's happening? Not at all. And here, rook a7. Never play rook a7 is what he guessed that I would say. And maybe rook a7 isn't poor. But it's certainly intuitive to play rook a7. And we also have to say that things, the milk has gone bad here. It's no longer clear that you're doing so hot, right? You write about knight f4 and cd. Probably cd is what you got to do, but right, things are a little gross. They're a little gross here, and I get why you played rook a7. Like, you write about this variation with cd, ed, and knight f6. But yeah, it's at the very least frightening. Oh my God, yeah, bishop f7 and queen g6 and d5. There's all kinds of drama going on there for us. Doesn't look healthy. So rook a7 is more the symptom of the disease more than anything else. And so white now finds some good moves. And I guess it's over, right? Because of the queen b8. So, an interesting foray into the endgame repertoire, and I do think that position with f5, it's a very rich position that it's frightening to play for black. It's also frightening for white, though, right? Very rich game right out of the box. Okay, let's do our first real ending, and let's get into it. Oh, this is, so this game is one of these correspondence games. And so white got to use the computer, not as like the stockfish, but the database to figure out what's going on. e5 strikes me as a weird move, and for the most part, I like white's approach to this position. Knight e2, boom. Knight g3, you have very nice light square control. Bishop g5, probably h6 is not great. And he says that we leave the database, and the point is that when black plays h6, I'm going to assume that he thinks that he's stealing the bishop, but in fact, we're enabling this idea where now white's just, I don't know, let's say clearly better or something like that, or at least a little bit better. Okay, now you're right, the doubled f-pawns proved more annoying than I anticipated because of breaks on f5, with f5. Now I want to stress in this position that I think the advice, if you will, that I have for you here is that I don't feel like you understood what your advantage was. So just in my eyes, the advantage that you have here is that your king should ultimately prove to be the better piece, right? And his king is going to be weaker, drafty, in this situation where he'll also have some pawn islands. And I mention the pawn islands because those pawns themselves will be drafty. So he's going to have simply more problems to deal with than you. And I think if you had maybe approached it like that, it would have been easier to play the following position. Queen d2 was correct. f5, I think that's got to be all right. I like that. I like that. I like that. And this position, well, I think white is, black hasn't done himself any favors, because there's just a good rule of thumb about positions with the heavies, where we can say that the side with the better king is simply going to be much better. And the first thing I'm going to assume is that you played g3 to meet the move queen g4. And you're still much better after g3, but I'm just going to assume that rook f1 has to be much better for you in this position, and definitely where I want to put the rook. Our king's better, our rook's better, everybody's groovy, and this is a little bit complicated, but, you know, whether I go, let's just say put the queen here or something, we got to believe in white. I mean, that rook is, if he lets us into f7, that's a real deal. Okay, but you're still doing great. f5. There were other moves, but okay. He's at least getting a little active. And now here's where I want to stress this thing that I was talking about before about the king's safety. There's a couple moves that you make, several actually, in the coming moves, where you loosen your king in a way that I don't feel it was necessary. So the rook, he's kind of fooling around over there. Is he really doing something? No. And the reason we want to play king b1 is not only to avoid playing a3, but we kind of are going to need to play king b1 anyway, because at some point some kind of annoying check is going to hit us, right? So it's not a terrible move, and I still like your position better, but it's going to make our position a little bit more drafty. And of course we have to worry about entrances here, and of course still the check on this diagonal. So queen c6, boom, rook c4, and now c3, and I wanted you to, of course, to play king b1 still, and I like your position a lot. After c3, I still like your position, but, you know, later it's going to be harder for you to avoid things like the Dauerschach, the perpetual check. Okay, so rook c5, snip, snip. Let's mention, one of the problems of this position for black is that you are just in general better, and it's very hard for him to get any play against you because your king is better. Now, weird stuff starts happening where queen d2 and he plays e4. Now, if he were to gambit the h-pawn, then at least intuitively I would want the guy to play d5, something like this, where, you know, he's going to try to give you a bloody nose over there in front of the king, and yeah, some real compensation. So e4 seems a mistake. Good move. Give some checks. And right around here, there's actually several moves coming up. I want you just to play king b1. Get out of there. Get out of there. He's going to have, we're going to be as snug as a bug as a rug on a2, at least more snug than we are sitting out on c1. And the checks are going to be annoying at some point. Get out of the way. He's not doing anything to you here. At least I don't see what he's doing. And you are not in a rush to push the pawns. You can consolidate your position first, and your king is the first thing. Again, his problem is not just that he's down the pawns and he has these runners. It's that his king is drafty. All right. And now it gets interesting. You write, I didn't think I could easily make progress with queens on the board. I, of course, want you to play king b1, right? Because I feel like your advantage is not just the pawns, but the fact that the queens are to his disadvantage. Because if we put the king on a2, we're just going to be much safer than he's going to be. He snips, and now we have ourselves, of course, an interesting situation. Do I know what's happening here? Not really. Not really. This is a hard one to call. Of course, it's more pleasant for you. Let's just see what happens. Boom, 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 and e3. Okay. e3 is not a convincing move, and here I think for sure the way you should play is just improve these pawns with like b4, c4, c5. You got to be winning that position. You have a beautiful blockade on the e3 pawn. Pawn is going nowhere. Now you go for this, and the problem, I guess, is what is going to happen with rook g2 and over. I wasn't sure. I'm not sure exactly what's going to happen. Now, instead, he makes, let's call it an instructive mistake. And at some point, I'd like to do a collection of endgame ideas, tricks that will come up. And this one that you could have gotten in the game definitely makes the list. So, what is the threat? The threat is rook over. And then if he snips, we've got rook a7. So black plays king b7. And now, this is a famous position where if we imagine, actually there's this hilarious joke that Yermolinsky told me once, where we said, you know, it really matters which pawns you have. And so if you give white, like, let's say you take away black's pawns and you give white like a gazillion pawns on the a file, it's still a complete draw because a6 will be met by king c7. So white must play for this plan, and you had the right idea, but black correctly found that move. Ah, bummer. And right, you just needed to play a4, and black can't do anything, right, at this point. So then he just has to wait for c4 to happen. He can't really leave the g file. The pawn on e3 is meaningless. And you would just walk it on up to c6, and once he takes the thing, rook c8. He moves to c7, rook a8. Classic win in the ending. Okay. So, let's go to the next one. This is Chesterfish. Let me flip the board. He's been with us several times. And here we go. I've seen this a couple of times, and I don't even know what the right move is, but c5 can't be wrong. And also, you give a question mark to ed, and I'm going to say ed can't be wrong either. I think your question mark has to do with the feeling of having the isolated queen pawn. But as we discussed, there's nothing wrong with the isolated queen pawn. And what has he done? Well, he's fixed your bishop, right? I like it. I like c4, mostly because we're shutting in the bishop. And maybe if I was going to make some advice about this position, black has to be hyper aware that that we keep the bishop on e2 bad, and white's main plan for fixing that bishop is going to be to move the knight on f3 so that something like f3 can happen, and that's unfortunately what we allow. So in this position, there's a variety of moves. I'm sure knight c6 is okay. I think bishop b4 is plausible. And maybe even bishop takes c3 is plausible. That hurts me. It hurts me a lot to give up that beautiful bishop. Now, let's give it a try, though. It does hurt me. It does hurt me. Now, you didn't like knight e4 because of bishop a3. I'm with you. I understand that one. And you were writing about maybe queen a5. Possible. I do think black, I don't know what's going on, but let's just say the drama here is going to be that that unopposed bishop is going to be a real danger going forward, the bishop on c1. But this would have at least been interesting. All right, castles, and now white plays very nicely. First bishop g5, snip, snip, knight e5. Very good. f4, beautiful. And now it's just truly unpleasant. Now it's unpleasant. So, boom. And here, as you correctly write, white makes a big positional mistake by playing bishop g4. As you said, your bishop is better, or his bishop is better than your bishop. But if I have a little bit of sympathy for the guy, the issue he feels is that that bishop from several moves ago was ill-placed, and now he just wants to get rid of him. And he correctly senses, I think, that he is going to still be better in the resulting position because his knight is better than yours, and if you take the thing, it's going to get a little ugly on the f-file, right? So it's not ideal, but I get it. All right. Now, I think the move that you should consider here is knight e7. And the point is to not allow the knight to dance on you with knight g6. And just to recognize that our knight on c6 is abysmal, right? Okay, so snip, snip, f6, and now he starts dancing. And here is a move you miss, and I get it. This would be painful. Knight h4, very nice move. And now we are suffering because the knight e7 in this position is going to be unstable. That's one of Gelfand's words that we're talking about in the book club. Unstable because it'll start to get body slammed on the e-file with rooks. So, queen c7. I think it's actually very unpleasant now. Good move. Whether it's good or not, it's definitely unpleasant, and that's suicidal. That's suicidal, Chesterfish. Okay, queen h5, rook f1. And here, the guy has a variety of moves, but what he did was abysmal. It was terrible. He takes and activates, well, fixes your king. Unbelievable. And so now we're going to reboot the game. I'm just going to say that I'm going to be lazy and say he doesn't even need to, we don't need to calculate this one out. This is losing for black. Okay. King's way open. Getting rid of, just everything's going your way. All right. So here, first of all, you should play king g6, I think. But what you did is all right. And here, you could have also played king g6. And that would have been what I would have wanted. I think you're right about that, actually. And, you give a variation, but the simple idea here is just that when you allow him to take on f6, as in the game, his rook on g3 gets a reason to live, namely hitting your g-pawn. And do I know how to evaluate that position? It's kind of hard. But at least after king g6, rook d5, and something like rook e2, I'm definitely going to want to be black because the rook on g3 is terrible. Right? Okay. Boom. Now, I also want to say in this position that moving the a rook to e8 makes a lot of sense to me. Okay, some stuff happens, and now we get this position. Are you fine? You're fine. There's nothing really wrong. Is he going to go passive? He's going to go passive. And here was a moment that I thought was instructive, where I definitely think this is, let's call it in the realm of the draw. But from a competitive standpoint, I liked the move g4, just to give him something to think about here. And it's hard for him to move away from, you know, allow b4 to happen. So anyways, it's probably still a draw, but here you can give him a little bit of the business. King f5. And that's, of course, a blunder, and it goes wrong. Yikes. And I guess now, well, we're in bad shape. I was just wondering about this, actually. I guess you know what he did is he had an exclam here, didn't he? Yeah, rook takes c4. Yeah, you found it. Okay, so the game has gone bad, and now he's winning. Oh, Chesterfish, bummer. Let's move on to Ox. I'm calling him Ox, but look at that. OX4141. I'm just going to call him the Ox. First time on the show, welcome to the show. We're going to get a Team Scandi. I don't have as much anger as Greg Shahada does against the Scandi. If I was going to do the Scandi, though, I think it would be less violent than this a6 b5 variation. But here we go. White generally should play d4 instead of d3, my feeling anyway. And I like black's position is fine. And one of the questions that Ox asked me was just like, well, where did I miss it? Where did things go wrong? And let's first say that things are looking great for you, and that knight g5 is a little bit reminiscent of Martin, aka Say Chess maneuver with knight g5, because it doesn't really do anything. But we have to say that it's no longer a simple matter as to like what white should do. Probably knight e5. Probably knight e5. Maybe that's a blunder actually, but probably knight e5. Okay, so knight g5, knight d7. You're doing great. Knight ce4, and I am not entirely certain what is happening here, but I think you're doing fine. And h6 comes to mind. Why do I think you're doing fine? The bishop on b3, it's really shut out of the game. I'm not worried about knight d6. As long as we don't lose the pawn over there, I'm not worried about that pawn. And yeah, something like h6. You're doing fine. And in general, we don't want to... When you take on e4, you're relieving him of this weird knight thing that he had going on. And then when you take on f4, you're improving his queen. Are you still fine? Yeah, you're still fine. But now it's becoming a little bit funky. Now, knight b6. Now we got to say, I don't know. There's no reason not to like white anymore. It's probably still equal. It's this move, it's hard to make a move actually, because if you play this, you know, the knight c5s of the world are going to start looking at us in the near future. Maybe you should have done it here. Okay, he takes, and here I think you should take with the queen. If he takes on c7, you're gonna, at the very least, some rook c8, queen, rook c2 stuff is going to be a lovely position for you. And of course, he has to worry about the f5s of the world as well. So I still like your position, bishop d5, rook e3, and I think this move, bishop e4, is a move that is played in terror. You're terrified he's going to come after you. But that's a beautiful bishop on d5. Okay, now white's again a little bit better. And you should probably play, what, something like c5. He's not really doing anything over there. Okay, let's just say white needs to come up with a constructive plan, and rook h3 really isn't helping. As far as I can tell, the only thing rook h3 really does is encourages you to make luft for your king. Still, it's not like immediately clear how white should play the position. Some kind of luft move for his king definitely comes to mind. G3, H4. If he wants to get fancy, he can. I was about to say he could think about B4, but I don't like it. He could play C3. Totally a thought. In any case, some weirdness happens. You go in to trade the queens. And we get this whole funny business happening. And let's say this was not a good move to play rook d5. No. Now look at that. Now you're better. You have the better rook. Probably his best move, a4. All right. So I went kind of fast, but I do want to talk about this resulting position that happens. So f6, king e3, g5, g3. And let me just say, very interesting position. And I like your next move. You gave it a question mark exclam, but what I like about it is from a competitive standpoint, it really is the move that gives white the most grief, and that is g4. It's psychological, and you see he's the one that breaks the tension in a way that's probably, I'm going to say, incorrect on the next move. Couple things. It's going to fix the pawns. It's going to mean, too, that if we go to a king ending, you have a tempo to give. Take some squares away. Right, and if you win both those pawns in a rook, melee, that's going to be a powerful pawn on g4. So I like g4 a lot. This, I think, is a question mark. And now he definitely needs to play rook a4. I'm going to say this should be losing. It's definitely losing after king d4, which allows e5. Okay. So it's the next move here that, as far as I can tell, gives it away. And surprisingly, it was surprising to me that you could throw it away in one move, where it seems like you should just be winning this position outright. And the move that I came up with, I think there's going to be more than one, but the move that I thought made sense was to play b4 here. And if he takes it, our king walks around and eats all those pawns. Yeah, and we're going to get stuff like a connected passed pawn. Should be nice, and it's great that we have. I'm pointing at the board instead of highlighting it like an idiot. It's great that we have this. We probably have other moves too besides b4. Now, we should stress that the problem that happens is exactly, what happens is that king c5 looks natural. Your opponent then plays great. Boom, boom, and now, surprisingly, I was surprised anyway, you don't have anything. Yeah, I don't think you have anything anymore. Usually you get a connected passed pawn and it's all over, but of course here the problem is that there's no way in. There's no way in for Mr. Flynn over here. Bummer. Okay, so a draw was agreed in the next couple moves. Okay, so James is new. He's got an English Chess Federation rating. So here we go. D5, I think it's a weird move. And back in the day, it was thought to be a mistake because of CD and, if you play knight d5, both e4 and knight f3 are just very pleasant positions. Later in my life, I discovered that black could think about playing this move g6, cleverly saying, you can't play e4 yet, and if knight c3, then I'll take d5, and we have a Grunfeld. In any case, right, d5, not correct. You write that it's called the Marshall defense. I'd never heard of it called that before. But anyways, terrible move. At least that's about my understanding of it. It's a terrible move. But what we now get is we're going to transpose to my favorite Carlsbad structure. And here we have an eternal debate as to whether white plays e3 or queen c2. White plays queen c2 in this game, James does, with the intention of blocking out bishop f5. And you have company in guys like Gelfand, who also have played that move. But in this position, I don't think you have to do it, because e3, bishop f5, and queen b3, I think you're winning. So it's not possible yet. And I think what you're doing is you're doing it by analogy, because c6 is the move that's normally played here, and here it's where white has two choices. Gelfand and others have played queen c2 to stop bishop f5, though to me, I just want to say, I've always felt like it was madness from black to allow this position. You know, yes, you have the two bishops, but oh my God, I don't want any part of that thing. In any case, I don't think you needed to play queen c2, and it's just a minor detail, because in a lot of positions we might not want to play queen c2, and we're going to see that in this game too, that you eventually move it off of c2. And let's call this the old Kasparov approach to this position. And if anyone's interested in learning about this position, if just going over those old Kasparov games from the 80s, and I think there's some in Test of Time, beautiful business. And really what we can say is that that black can always choose, as he does in this game, to play c5. Once he plays c5, it's a dramatically different structure. And I think this is where white gets confused. I think white makes a telling mistake here. That has to do with how the pieces move within different pawn structures. So here's a way of thinking about it. The pawn on f3, when you first see it, when I first saw it, it seemed like, oh, the pawn on f3 is there so that white can play e4 and expand in the center. Definitely one of the ideas that white has. But the most important thing that f3 is doing is controlling the knight on f6 and giving our bishop, the far more important thing, and the secondary thing is that we get to move our bishop on f2. And the reason the bishop f2 is significant is that a plan that several players have played, even recently, in the earlier positions, is knight h5 to trade off the bishop. Now knight h5, we're just going to play bishop f2. We don't want to exchange. We have a nice little spatial cramp against black. Okay, rook c8, and you play rook a d1, and there are several moves you can play there, but I like rook a d1 a lot. It's just nice to, a variety of reasons to have it there. And c5, black shifts. And one thing that people watching the show are going to barf because they've heard me say it so many times. But whenever, this is my little spiel, whenever a pawn move is made, that's when you kind of have to reassess. It's a green, it's a light that should go on, saying that it's time to reassess what the roles of the pieces in the position are, right? So, for example, in this position, our knight on c3 is our worst piece, dominated by c6 and d5. Once c5 happens, well, we're doing great. The knight's a beautiful piece. The other thing that happens after c5 is e4 out the window. No, we don't want any part of e4 anymore. That's just no longer our intention. And one of the cool things that the old Kasparov games showed was like, oh, with c5, it's not like, you know, the idea of e4 goes away, but we still have all kinds of other ideas. And you write that c4 is a threat here because the bishop would be trapped. First of all, I don't think it's trapped. You can go to f5. But your move, queen d2, probably okay. Like I said earlier, not clear that it belonged on c2. But even a very simplistic move like bishop f2, I think that's a nice position for you as well. c4 is controversial because then, again, a pawn move after which we can reassess our business, because then we truly will be looking for e4, now that the center is not fluid anymore and we have a firm control over the d4 point. Okay, a6, and here comes the crime, e4. Now, I'm not sure what the evaluation of this position is. I just know that that's a mistake because now some kind of CD is going to hit you and the whole thing is going to go up in smoke, right? The center is going to collapse. So something like bishop f2, intending maybe knight g3, makes a lot of sense to me. All right, things went wrong. And I gotta believe in black here. And honestly, it feels like some tactical nonsense is happening here too. Now, bishop e2 and knight g6. Okay, so there's several moves coming up here where I felt I was surprised you didn't take on e6. Just to kind of ask him, you know, how first, you know, yeah, just to get him a little, get some weaknesses on the light squares there. Not thrilled with what black did there. Also not super thrilled about the queen being on e3. Yeah, some weird stuff happens, but let's say that in this position, nota bene, he gave up his good bishop over there. In this position, and you write about it, f4 is very powerful. And I think the way to conceptualize why giving up the pawn on c3 is plausible is not only are you doing this f4, f5 stuff, but then like our dark square bishop, he's messing around on our dark squares, and there's all kinds of nasty pins with bishop e1 and that kind of stuff coming up too. So it's just not believable that he should be able to take advantage of it. Plus f4 just looks so delightful over there. Okay, yeah, things go wrong now. And I got to assume he's winning now. Now, he does, actually, this was, let's just say, that does not look right to me. Just because he's pinning himself. Now, maybe he gets away with it, but it just does not look right to me. And you write about bishop e3, which, right, maybe, you know, he's just given you a hint of maybe being able to do something. And unfortunately here, we're just hanging everything with knight f3. Happens to the best of us, James. Happens to the best. So I thought that was an instructive mistake in that Queen's Gambit decline structure. And the Queen's Gambit decline structure is interesting because if you go through some of those Kasparov games, you can get a sense of like, oh, I know how to play this position. I kind of know where the pieces go. All right. So, Paul in New Jersey. Paul in New Jersey has submitted, my friends. He has submitted another terrible, terrible loss. Let's review our schedule here. A most terrible loss from Paul in New Jersey. Yeah. So, I did not forget to go back to the other scene. And it's remarkable, this one. And it's also brave of Paul to submit the game. Now, Paul's openings are, you know, he knows a little bit, and he knows that this is a mistake, which it is. We steal the pawn. So, I don't disapprove that you stole this pawn, but I do disapprove of the way you played it after. So, let's say that white is clearly better, but black has hope for playing with the two bishops. Okay? So, after rook e8, I think your next move is a big mistake. It's not like it's lose the game or anything, but it's going to make your task a lot harder on a practical level. And let's just look what you did. When you play d4, you're giving black the ability to open the position and to cause mayhem. And of course that's what he wants to do. And so right here in this position, you're going to have to play patiently with d3. And it's actually going to be a situation where we're going to, I think, take away all of black's counterplay. Because, actually, let's play knight f3 first. Yeah, knight f3 first is better. On d3, I think I'm making a mistake because then bishop b4 is maybe unpleasant for us. In any case, it's the same idea. We're going to play d3 next move. And we're just going to hold the line in the position. The c5 isn't going to have any particular meaning, and he's not going to be able to open or loosen our position. And the pawns on d3, e4 should be said. The reason winning a center pawn, Nimzovich writes about this, the reason winning a center pawn is more valuable than stealing some other pawn is, I don't know what he's going to do, let's just put this guy here, is because the center pawn can often just end up controlling everything. Like here, the pawn on e4 and his friend on d3 really do put a hurt onto the knight, right? And we're not going to win this game immediately. We're going to have to, we're down in time, and we have to bring out our guys, but yeah, we're doing great. Okay, so d4, instructive mistake. And now black, I guess, is doing fine. And some wild stuff happens, Paul, and you're probably worse, but look at that. You're going to start getting the power of the unopposed bishop yourself. I take all the credit for this, Paul. I take all the credit, and now you go after him. We've discussed on the show many times. When you have bishops of opposite color, it's the person with the initiative who has the advantage. Absolutely. Now he's in some trouble. Now you mentioned you considered f3. f3 certainly makes some sense because we own the dark squares, right? So we're not going to weaken really that diagonal. Good. And honestly, both takes are miserable for him. I assume this one's just losing directly, but definitely after bishop e6, you're doing great, Paul. All right, so the game's already all over. The computer called that a blunder, but come on. That's obviously a great move. Now, how you lost this one, Paul? I don't know, buddy. I don't know how you lost this one. Man, oh man. Oh, I just realized your opponent's named Koningslopa. I guess I'm going to say that's Dutch for King's Bishop. All right, King f7. Now, let me stress that you're totally winning here. And anyone can blow it, Paul. I just want to say that. Of course, you look at this game and it's like, oh, woe is me, how could I have ever blown this thing? But it's anybody can blow a position. And that's why in this position you should be thinking less about stealing his pawns and then doing a race and more about mating the guy. So, for example, rook a7, you're still winning the game. But the move that you should be thinking of, but probably not even hesitating, is king f4. Go mate the dude. Go mate him. That's your right to go mate him. If he wants to steal our pawn r2, we will put our king in his face and the game will end. The game will simply end. So that's my advice. Are you totally winning? Yes. And some amazing magic happens here where he gets a little bit of play. This is truly stunning. And all of a sudden, you say now you're losing. Now, are you really losing? I have a hard time saying that. But it has become suddenly complicated, Paul. Oh, no. It's hard. Yeah, I can't accept that you're losing this position. No, you're not losing this position. But did it not go our way? It didn't go our way. Bishop d6, you're still doing fine. Which is what you did. And now you should play rook d5 check if you don't want to lose. So boom. Oh, yeah, that's scary. Oh, yeah. Bummer. Paul, man, oh man. Paul, I want you, instead of maybe getting so mad at yourself, I want you to get more angry at your opponents. Start crushing them, man. Yeah, I want you to show us a game where you crush somebody next time. I know you're doing it. I know you're not losing every game. But I want to see some anger. I want to see some anger. Because this can't go on, Paul. This can't go on. Okay. Let's go to Ricker. And Ricker has been showing amazing improvement. He's been doing this show, I don't know, for a year, more than a year. And I always put him last because he's out there in Polynesia. I don't even know if that's correct, but somewhere way out there in a totally different time zone. And so he's going to watch it on the replay. And let me switch the colors. What's impressive to me about Ricker is that, you know, he's an older guy and has gone from making elementary hanging of pieces to then making, you know, loss of time, and then slowly eradicating more positional kinds of mistakes. And one of the things he took to heart was me yelling at people about time. And so, of course, the move a3 is a mistake. All right, black has several ways to play the position, and that's one of the nice things about the perk is when you get a position, white will throw all kinds of things at you, and then you can have a variety of plans at your disposal. All right, e5. Bishop g4. Plausible. It's a little bummer. It's a little bit of a bummer that you're going to give away the bishop, but you're still doing fine. You're doing fine. Good. I like it. I like that one a lot too. And now after queen b3, I'm going to criticize this move, Ricker. Your opponent's given you a fine chance, and that is you could have played snip. He's got to take back that way, and then you can return your knight. No, you're not winning yet, but it's definitely where the knight wants to go, right? Okay, a4, queen d7, boom, boom, h4, controversial, weird because you're allowing bishop e3, bishop h3, boom, boom, all right. Get in his face. Knight h2, and look at this move, Ricker. Bang! I like it a lot. So let's just think about what's happening. You're going to be threatening f4. The knight on h2 is terrible. And I love f5 because you're really expressing with it the spirit of the King's Indian player, where you're not afraid of weaknesses in front of your king because that's your side of the board. And the knight on h2 is terrible. Okay, so he takes, I'm going to call that a mistake, and bishop b6. All right, so let's say this was okay, but that your next move I don't approve of on a practical level, okay? Yes, you want your knight there, but I really don't want to allow the rook in, okay? So this is, we can call it a practical piece of advice. Is you're in control of this game. And I think if you just play a move like rook c8, follow it up with knight d4, I think you're winning. Both of his minor pieces are sidelined. Your king is better. It's going great, right? So this one, it just, yeah, don't allow the rook on the 7th. Too big. Nice move. Nice move. So, yeah, beautiful moves, Ricker. Pushing him back. Queen d2, a mistake. Knight g4, and this is an example of Ricker using the tactics. Bam! And now black's winning. White, of course, thought he was the genius with knight g4. It is, though, an example of the kind of thing I'm worried about when you allowed rook c7. No one's ever formulated as a rule, but something like a rook is worth a... I don't want to say something like a rook is worth a pawn on the 7th. I just want to say it's generally worth a lot. And especially on a practical level. Here, however, bam, it's too powerful. Your knight is too good. And now it's truly the end of the world. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Give me it all. Yeah. Give me it all. Nice and smooth. No need to rush. It's going to be a mate over there. Oh, we had a puzzle rush mate, though. Puzzle rush mate came over here, Ricker. Rook h1, king g2, rook g1, king e2, rook e1. But, of course, you're crushing him. It's very pleasant, of course, to play like this. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for playing. Ricker, I want to say you have really improved through the years. And, you know, we debate a lot on the dojo about the possibility for improvement, how much you can improve. And this whole COVID situation has taken that discussion to a new level because we've got guys like Mitch and others, a lot of people now really pushing for, let's call it adult improvement. And it's hard, but people are doing it. And, you know, Ricker, I think, has definitely improved hundreds of points, hundreds, like Mitch has, since he began. So that's encouraging. Rick is in his 70s, Mitch. You're like, what are you going to be, 25 tomorrow? Give me a break. All right, guys, I'm going to end it there. Thank you so much for the show. If you want to submit a game, I will have a thread up on chess.com very soon. And if you're watching this on YouTube, I will put the link underneath the video. And you can submit a game, and it'll be, you know, next month, December. And actually, I'll take an educated guess when it's going to be. Sometimes the gnomes at chess.com change it up on me here. Oh, well, let me go to the next month. Yeah. So December's tricky, but I'm going to guess it'll probably be Wednesday the 30th. Unless something weird happens. It'll be Wednesday the 30th. I just had a flash that, you know, they had a vaccine by then, and I was playing in a tournament on over the New Year's holiday. It's probably not going to happen. But if it does, I will change up and let people know in the post that we'll do probably in the next couple days, and you guys can put a game there if you want to submit it. Again, the point is to help you analyze your own game. So I really encourage you, if you're going to post a game, it's not about having the best game. It's about you using the opportunity to go deep into the analysis of your own game to learn how to think about the moves that you did. And the reason it's better than studying somebody else's game, even if it's some super GM, is you can reflect on how you thought about the position, and that will form the basis for your own personal growth. And also, it's just fascinating to reconsider things to which you have an emotional relationship, as in any tough struggle over the board. Okay, thanks so much, guys. I'm going to be St. Louis GM in residence the next couple weeks, so you can find me on their channel doing loads of stuff as well. Please check out the Chess Dojo. If you feel inclined, subscribe, and please give us some money with the Patreon. We need some money. All right, everybody. Bye-bye.